I am excited to come back in like 10 years when we're talking about mixing for neural implants and like low pass smell filters and things. Hi, Ben. Oh, wait, you're not Ben. You're Dave.
I am. Hi, Carl.
Okay, so elephant in the room. Ben is not here today. This is an odd one where I'm actually doing an episode with my good friend Dave Stagl, who I am going to be interviewing today as a special little secret Sonics curveball we're throwing at you. So Ben has had a bunch of holidays lately and some family stuff. So we just wanted to get a couple extra fun little episodes in the bank, so you don't have to wait around for us in case we get behind. Um,
You didn't
so
tell me it had to be fun.
well, I feel like it's gonna be.
This might be too much pressure for me now.
No, you'll be fine. I believe in you, Dave. I believe in
Okay.
you. So that said, I am here with not Ben. This is Dave Stagl. And Dave is a lovely human who also is a badass mixing engineer and Atmos engineer down in the lovely, warm, and very humid state of Georgia. And before we get too deep into me prodding him and all of the things that make his little brain and heart tick, I want to give you a chance, Dave, to introduce yourself to the audience and give everybody a little background about what you do now and how you got here.
Well, like you said, I'm a mix engineer. I've been doing this, well, it's been a long time. I was trying to do math the other night, and I don't like doing math. But I mean, if we really want to go back, I was doing sound kind of in high school. That was kind of where I got into it, doing plays and musicals. And then when I went to college, I was playing in bands and ended up interning at a recording studio when I was in Chicago. Did that for a bit, and then I started doing, geez, I've done so much stuff. Like, I did a lot of audio post production, everything from like corporate videos for medical associations, like the most unglamorous possible audio stuff you can make a living doing. I did that, to TV broadcast stuff. And then I spent a lot of time in the live sound world working with houses of worship, and I still do a bunch of that. And about 10 years ago, I finally went independent after being on staff for all those years. Finally went independent, and I've done a variety of things in that time. Still do audio post here and there, still do live sound. But the big focus right now for me that I'm really trying to dig in on, that Carl knows about, is really mixing records, and especially Dolby Atmos. I love Atmos, and that's kind of the main thing I'm trying to do these days.
That's awesome, and I feel like I'm not surprised that you're so excited and interested in Atmos, especially considering not the medical not the medical post-production stuff, but at least with
Yeah, that
the
was
the
what did it.
yeah, oh gosh, it's the obviously the natural next step from mixing voiceovers about knee surgeries is to get into Dolby Atmos mixing.
Right.
That's not the kind of thing I want to be immersed in, but but it makes sense though that you have this background not just in musical theater but also in like the house of worship stuff, and the fact that both of those are a very three-dimensional experience, right? Like when you're at a house of worship, if you're seeing a musical, you're seeing a play, like even if the things are technically coming from in front of you, like the experience itself is all around you. So it makes more sense than you might think at first, that ended
Yeah,
up
I
kind of making it a thing for you.
Yeah, I think that definitely played into it. The bigger thing for me even was, the first time I heard Atmos when I was at my buddy's studio and he had just put it in, it took me back to my days playing in bands. Like, I still remember the first time we played at the House of Blues in Chicago, and it was like the first real monitor experience where I had like a pair of wedges down in front of me, and there were side fills, and the back line and everything was just right. And it was just like the most, I don't know, almost euphoric experience, like
Yeah.
playing up in that. And it made me, Atmos made me think of that. It made me think of being in kind of rehearsal rooms where we would all just be set up around, and you just had everything around you, and you were kind of inside the music. And that's an experience that, I don't know, I love it. And to be able to take that to other people and give them a taste of that, it just turns into so much more of an emotional experience listening to music that way. It's hard to explain. Like, if you haven't heard it, it's kind of hard to articulate. Like, you need to hear it.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing to me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I like to think of you. I think I might have messaged you yesterday about how I think you're like the least pretentious gear nerd that I know.
Yeah, I
And
don't
I
know.
stand by that.
I think some friends of mine might argue with you on that a little bit, maybe,
But
or they would laugh because it's true. So
yeah, well, I mean, like I think because of that, I know how tempting it would be to be, the host of a podcast right now, talking to somebody that's like, uh, I'll just say knee deep in Atmos, and get really nerdy and technical and ask you about a whole bunch of like technical questions. But
mhm.
I know that that's like, you could, if I asked you a bunch of nerdy questions, you'd happily answer them. But I feel like you and I both want to talk a little bit more about that emotional experience of Atmos, because I think that's, I've seen, at least when Atmos is brought up in conversation, it's usually like this, like, oh, this three-dimensional like wizardry, and like all of the components instead of thing, all like the tech behind it. But I think what really strikes me about you and the way that you approach it is the fact that it's so experience based, that everything that you're doing, it's almost like the technology's there to like enable you to do these things, but all of the decisions are based on the experience that you want to, I mean, in a way, like you want to shape for yourself as you're listening to it, because you want to share that experience with the listener and the fans of the artists you're working with. Is that like a fair description of it?
Yeah, you said it all. There you go.
I
We'll
think
see you next. We'll
yeah,
see you next time
yeah.
when Ben will be back.
Yeah, I think I just wrote your new website copy for you. So there.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Carl.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was, to me, and I think, the technical side. I mean, there's a technical side to audio production, but to me, learning and understanding the tech side, it was always more of a means to how do we do this creative thing. I'm more interested in that than the gear. It's like, what do they say about the audiophiles, they buy records to listen to their gear. And I think people who are into immersive, as we call it today, or who are into surround sound, I think it's the exact opposite. We buy the surround stuff and the immersive stuff so that we can actually experience this music and movies and whatever, we want to on that. There's just something about it. Like it's, gosh, I bring people into my studio and they sit in my chair and they go, "Oh, I get it." And that's usually after silence, because people are speechless when they hear it. And it's just, and everybody, like, sometimes people are mad because they're like, how do I go back after this? And it's just, the thing I think about with music is like, we get all hung up on the recording industry and making records, and this is how you do it. And the recording industry is really only, maybe 100 years old, little more than that, whereas music has been around for thousands and thousands of years. So it was only up until the last kind of 100 years where we were kind of putting it into these like tiny boxes that we're going to play it out of. Prior to that, you had to be in a room with musicians and you had this feeling of it being all around you. And I think there's a lot of people these days who haven't experienced music that way. Not as many people have, really experienced live music a lot. I mean, I have, from playing in bands and mixing live bands and doing that kind of thing. But that kind of, immersive, I hate using like buzzwords like that, but you're just immersed in it and it's all around you. And I think there is something about that connection. To me, it's a lot closer to the way it's supposed to be, like the way nature intended music to be when we're hearing it more in that format. There's something strangely more natural about it, even though it's completely artificial what we're doing in this, but that's the way it's always been, with
Yeah.
making music and recording music and everything. There's, if we think about, drums these days, what is natural about modern drums? It's like there was someone I was having a discussion with, because their client, they wanted it natural, and then you have to sit and figure out, well, what does that actually mean? What do they think is actually natural? Who knows?
Yeah. And do they really want natural, or do they want to want natural?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
As a drummer, I feel like that's a big thing. And because I think for vocals, it's the same way. It's like, if you really want a natural,
Oh yeah.
like it's like that Tim Robinson, like, you sure about that? I think that's the thing. And, it goes back to being a creative choice. And is the creative choice to showcase the imperfections and to highlight that, or and to capture like a specific moment in time, or is the creative intent to create something that is bigger and different, and something that maybe wasn't possible in our shared reality, so we're creating a bit of like an alternate reality that those drums live in? And there's no right or wrong way. And I think this, when it comes to like Atmos mixing, like there's no, you probably agree with this, like there's no like right or wrong way to do it, but there are going to be some ways. Well, there are going to be some ways that are like more effective and more, and like get a more emotionally impactful story across, and versus just like, oh cool, like the cowbell's moving in a circle around my head.
Yeah, it is fun to move cowbells around your head. Well, I don't know if I've done it with a cowbell, but
Oh man, you haven't lived.
I've moved everything else I could around my head. There's a lot of room for what I like to call stupid Atmos tricks, like gimmicky. I think about the down at Disney, they had like the Muppets 3D experience, and in the movie, like, they keep going stupid 3D tricks and, like poking stuff out of the screen. And you can do that kind of stuff in Atmos. And when you start messing around, you probably should do it and get it all out of your system. So that
it's like same thing with like drummer chops. Like, everybody goes through a phase where they play a fill every other bar. And then eventually you I don't know, you reach nirvana and you realize you don't have to fill it all. And I feel like that might be,
I know a lot of drummers who haven't reached that yet, but hopefully that's the goal. That is the dream of music directors and producers everywhere. That drummers will reach that nirvana. But yeah, there's a lot of creative opportunity in Atmos for sure. There are some technical things though on the creative side a little more, I think sometimes that people don't think about, like one of the things that I learned very quickly is, you have to think about phase between speakers a lot more, because, if you think about, like, if we're multi-miking a drum kit and we're trying to place microphones so that we're not having a lot of phase problems because where we place them, you kind of have that in reverse when you start moving into immersive, because now we've got all of these speakers, and if you've got the same thing coming out of multiple speakers, depending on where someone is sitting, you can start to create phase problems, and you can do weird, like, I hear it with some people's mixes, like if you move your head a couple inches to the left or the right, like everything just goes swishy on you. So that's stuff that, like, there are kind of limits, I guess, to everything, but there's limits in everything. And I look at a lot of that more in terms of, there's best practices and you have to figure them out. But once you start figuring that out, when you start flying the cowbells, they're way more effective and impactful. Now I really want to fly a cowbell around, just because.
That's your homework after this call, Dave. Now, so this brings up an interesting. Hopeful it's interesting to me. Hopefully it's interesting to you and the listeners. But there's the approach that a lot of mixers will take, where they talk about mixing in mono, right? And they want to mix it in mono, and if it sounds good in mono, then when they break it apart to stereo, it'll still sound good. That's their theory. Is there like an equivalent or like an analogous approach to mixing Dolby, like the Dolby Atmos? Like, do you like because when you're talking about these different phase issues, is it something where like you're always like checking an immersive mix in mono, or are you checking it in stereo to see if like the stereo still holds up, or like how does that affect your approach to that?
That's a really good question. I check the mix in a lot of different formats, because part of the benefit to working in Atmos is it's a scalable format. All these formats we're used to, stereo, mono mainly, they're all channel-based formats, and you have to have a very specific speaker configuration. I mean, it's minimal if you're doing stereo, but you have to have a very specific speaker configuration to play it back. When you get up into like 5.1 for surround, you have to have 5 speakers, or you're going to miss out on something potentially. With Atmos, that's not the case. With Atmos, it's an object-based format, which basically it means that you kind of just can work in the format, and then on the back end, the renderer goes, okay, there's speakers here and here and here and here, and then it goes, I'm gonna put everything in the best speaker possible to sort of replicate the creative intent on that placement. So I like to check a lot of those different fold downs to see how is it going to translate from, the full Atmos basically all the way down to stereo, because I'm actually mixing stereo and Atmos at the same time. And probably for the last, I don't know, year or so, maybe longer, all the stereo mixes I've done in my studio, they've all been derived from an Atmos mix. I mean, a lot of the stuff I've been doing is kind of more broadcast related, like live material, and that stuff, it's going out over the web most of the time, so it's only going to be stereo, but I still mix it in here in Atmos because I can, and I'm going to enjoy listening to it that way if I'm mixing it. But I'll have to check, I have to check the fold down. I have to make sure it's going to work in stereo as well as, I don't think I really have checked mono in a long time. One of the things that a lot of engineers talk about who get into Atmos is they're not carving space the same way as, like, with stereo records these days. We've got all of this stuff we're trying to kind of cram into 2 speakers. And with Atmos, we have a whole lot more room, and guys aren't carving things up as much. You're not hacking up acoustic guitars until they kind of sound like rhythmic washboards in the mix to fit in with everything. You can let them sort of breathe and live a little bit. And what a lot of engineers are finding, and this is an ongoing discussion I have with people. We don't understand how it works, but somehow it folds down even without having all that stuff carved out. I think some of it might have to do with us having a lot more dynamic range available in Atmos, because there is actually a loudness limit you have to deliver things at. We can't squash stuff like we do with stereo releases. You have to deliver at, not to get technical, but you have to deliver at neg 18 LUFS or LKFS, which I know for a lot of people who are making records these days, that might be horrifying, like the idea of that. But it actually, for me anyways, it's freeing, because now you've got all of this dynamic range and you can have so much more punch, and you're not losing that bottom octave because you're squashing things with a limiter anymore. So you have just kind of a deeper thing. And I think that's also part of the emotional side of why does this connect with people on a more emotional level sometimes. It's because we're not squashing it. I'm a friend of compressors. I'm not.
You're not like anti-loudness out of spite,
No.
Yeah.
I think, the loudness thing, and it's a bigger discussion. These days, the loudness, like mixing something loud or doing that limiting just for the sake of it, it's kind of silly. Every streaming service, they're all normalizing the loudness. That's not why I think you should do it, but there is an aesthetic that you get when you do start limiting things that way. And sometimes I think it's desirable, and sometimes the artists desire it. And to me, that's like the best way to make that choice and the reason to make that choice. And I guess you could still do it in Atmos if you want to really crush things. I tend to find that a lot of the mixes that are sort of coming from stereo mixes that were originally squashed, if they're taking stems and remixing things, and those stems had kind of been put through the blender of the 40 plug-in 2-bus kind of thing that people do, a lot of times those songs in Atmos, they don't feel as good because they're not taking advantage of the same amount of space and the same amount of dynamics. Not always, but if you take those songs sometimes and you put them up against something that is a little more open and that is going to breathe a little bit, the ones that were crushed beforehand, they don't hit as hard as maybe we think they do when we listen to them in stereo. So I think that's something that a lot of us, we're still kind of figuring out, like, where is the line between, hitting things, kind of the way we were used to doing it for a while, and letting things breathe so that the music impacts the listeners the way we want it to hit them. Because at the end of the day, for me anyways, that's what matters, is how is this stuff going to connect with people?
Yeah. So, okay. So that makes me want to, I'm going to ask a question that I'm pretty sure most of the listeners are thinking right now too. So when you were saying that most of the stereo mixes that you've been doing kind of like started out as the Atmos mixes. So when the emotional intent of the artist for like a big dynamic, spacious, immersive Dolby mix, when that gets, like kind of folded down to stereo, but then the emotional goal sometimes can be different between the Atmos mix and the stereo mix. Like they might want the stereo mix because it doesn't have the, I don't want to say like forced normalization of like the negative 18 integrated, they might want the stereo mix to be louder because they want it's going to be up against other stereo mixes that are not kind of evened out by the expectations and the requirements of the Atmos. So that was a kind of a long way to tee up the question of what do you have to do differently to the stereo version? Like after you kind of submit down to stereo, then is it just like, okay, this is now mastering round two? Like, is it just an adjustment of like the limiter, or like does anything kind of fundamentally fall apart when you have to when the artists ask you to push the loudness of the stereo version to a much different degree than the loudness of the Atmos version?
I mean, okay, I'm gonna back up a little bit because
Okay.
maybe this gets into some of my my background and where I came up, because I started in studios where we were analog. Like when I went into the studio, it was right in sort of a transition time, I feel like, where we were moving between analog and digital. I remember we would do some sessions were on 2-inch analog tape, and then other sessions we were working on like 8-ats or, in Pro Tools or things like
Yep.
that. So the way I have kind of looked at metering in a lot of ways, I have always had kind of this sort of analog level sort of mindset. And I've always kind of mixed to that. And, I haven't really, I know guys who, they mix in the limiters and it's great. I never really got into that, and it's just that's not the way I came up. And the guys who were my heroes, that's not the way they worked, so I never would do that. So my approach in stereo, make a long story way too long, my approach in stereo was, I just mix, and at the end, when you get into that kind of mastering phase, that's where I will start applying any kind of loudness to make things, quote unquote competitive, and to get things up and doing what you have to do. And in stereo right now, like let's say for the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of times I want to get that limiter on towards the end of the mix because, as anybody who's done this knows, sometimes your balance will change. If you are going to do, the amount of limiting that you need to get up to those kind of modern levels, a lot of times when you put that limiter on, at least it's been my experience, you put that limiter on and your balance can start to change. Things poke out, there are things that sit back all of a sudden that you can anticipate, and sometimes things poke out. It's like, how did that doesn't make any sense. But now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to tweak that a little bit.
This goes back to your hatred of math. It's all the math.
Yes, no math.
Too much math happening. I don't like it.
That's my podcast rule. There's no math allowed. Man, why? I know that like music is supposed to, kids who play music do much better in math somehow, and that's all fine and dandy, but we're not in grade school anymore, and we're not doing. If I wanted to earn the engineer title because of math, I would go do something else, like
something slightly more lucrative, I think.
Yes, definitely. Anyway, so to get back to applying workflows to Atmos, like I have worked with a calibrated monitor setup for, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 years, where and this is a concept that kind of comes out of broadcast world. I got introduced to it honestly through Bob Katz and some of the stuff that he's written on his different approaches to monitoring. And basically the idea is you have a sort of signal level that's your kind of goal. So let's say 0 VU, and the equivalent in digital is going to be like, depending on your converters, it's going to be like neg 18, neg 20. Now we're getting too technical in math, but The idea is you have that level in your gear, and then you calibrate the sort of sound pressure level in your space to be this sort of comfortable, ideal level. And then you just mix, and you don't look at the meters. You actually can just work. And strangely, at the end of the day, you are right where you want to be,
Yeah.
within a couple of dB. And in broadcast applications, it's just a beautiful thing because you just mix and you just listen. And that's kind of more where I came from. Like, we didn't used to sit around and think about, like, oh, well, maybe we're supposed to turn this up a little bit. It's like nobody worried about that. I mean, I still remember the first time I was in a session when I was an intern, and I remember explaining to the engineer who was mentoring me, like, hey, the meters on the multi-track, they're clipping on the 2-inch. And I remember him looking at me going, the redder the better, because he wanted some of that tape saturation that was happening on drums and things like that. But it was all more about the sound. So in Atmos, that's kind of how I approach it to begin with, is I'm just listening. Everything's calibrated in my studio, and Dolby has recommendations on that. We don't need to get into that today.
Thank you.
But when I take that, yeah, you're welcome. If you are having trouble sleeping, I can point you to some websites. I will take the stereo kind of fold down version of it, and then I will master it much the same way as I would if I had mixed it in stereo originally. So what does it need? I find I use less EQ on that stage now. So a lot of times it's a limiter, but sometimes I might put some fun stuff in there, black box kind of things, or tape things, or
that would just be for the stereo version, right?
Just for the stereo version. Sometimes with the Atmos, it gets, the thing where it gets interesting in the Atmos world is if you have a song that had already been mixed in stereo, and now you have to decide, or the artist has to decide, how close do we want the Atmos to feel to the stereo version? Because, people who are listening on Apple devices, they can sit there and you can flip back and forth between the two of them. I mean, it's not easy, but it's relatively easy. And once you understand how to do it, you can flip back and forth between the spatial version and the stereo version. And the general consensus among engineers is you don't want it to be like a whiplash experience for somebody going between the two. I think you want to maintain the spirit of the stereo when you go over into Atmos. You're really just kind of expanding things. Yeah. So you have to decide, if the stereo was originally crushed, and now on the Atmos side, what do? Do we let it breathe a little more and take a little more advantage of that? Or does that change the feel of the song?
Yeah.
So you have to start, putting some of that squash back into things a little bit. That's, it's a creative thing you got to figure out.
Yeah. And if it does change it, does the artist want that? Does the artist want it to feel like its own unique thing? In a way, I think what's interesting is there are a lot of parallels between the difference between, mixing for CDs versus mixing for cassettes, or mastering for CDs versus mastering for cassettes, or mastering, versus vinyl. And I think what the thing that's so interesting is that for all of those, we're used to them all requiring different approaches and kind of specs. And we know, you can't have nearly as much bottom end in the vinyl, that's all normal. But those different formats, you didn't have the ability to literally flick a button and all of a sudden it goes from one version to the other.
Right.
Like there was always, if nothing else, even if you were like switching between, even if you were a total doofus and you were like switching between like the phono into like the RCA or whatever, like there was still like a bit of a a buffer time, right? Like there was still like a little bit of a
Yeah.
time in between. And like even if you were trying to switch it, like you had that break. And now it's like you can like instantaneously go from one to the other. And yeah, like if you want it to be a whiplash, I feel like some artists probably do want that. They want it to be a totally different experience. Then awesome. But then if they don't want that, that's not it's a totally different set of considerations. And I feel like this is where I want to kind of like ask you a bit about the conversations that you have with the artists. Like how do you decide, or how do you help them to decide and articulate what their goals are for, not just for the stereo mix, not just for this fairly new technology of the immersive audio, but then like having that decision about, well, how close should they be? Like what are those conversations like?
Uh, Man, I don't know. I don't even necessarily think about it in the same way. I think my approach is more when I'm talking to someone about their music. I'm not necessarily thinking specifically in terms of format or like, do you want, do you want the guitar up in the front left or do you want it in the back right?
Hmm.
I don't, I don't know that that's, I don't know that that's ever a good way to approach doing any kind of music. For me, it's much more of a feel based
Yeah.
kind of thing. So if I'm going to have a conversation with an artist about what they're going for, intent, things like that up front, I'm going to have all that stuff in my head when I sit down to actually mix. And all of the kind of decisions that I'm making in the studio are going to be based on the context that I get from the artist, which is hopefully very deep because, you don't have to do as many revisions typically on the back end if you get it right. So it's the same kind of thing. When I'm doing stuff, though, the first thing I typically deliver to somebody is I deliver the stereo. So because the stereo, I mean, as much as I want Atmos to be the most important thing, where we're at right now, the stereo is still kind of the key thing for people. So I always look at it as let's get the stereo right first. Even though I'm working in Atmos, I'll get the stereo version right first, and then we can listen over to the immersive side. And generally, it's just little balance changes sometimes, if anything, for the immersive one. And a lot of times I'm not making any changes.
Yeah.
It all just kind of sorts itself out. I haven't worked with artists yet who like they're not thinking about like I want this pad to kind of engulf and swirl around on things. What I see happening is when I do a mix for someone in immersive, I've had some local artists here who have come over and listened in the studio. I can see the wheels turning when they start hearing their song. The wheels are turning for what am I going to do on my next record and how am I going to start thinking about this more. So I think as we go forward, there's going to be a lot more of that kind of collaboration in a lot of ways on the immersive side. And not that there isn't right now, because when I've had, and it's been the most, I mean, it's not bizarre for me, but I've had attended sessions for the first time in, I don't know how long. Because when I've been doing Atmos stuff for local artists, they want to come over and hear it in the speakers. And they'll come over and we'll talk about, oh, maybe we should move some of the vocals a little more around. Or sometimes, and this is a discussion that I've had with other engineers. You know, there are some songs where if you try and pull it into the space too much, it feels like you've pulled the music apart rather than made it immersive.
Yeah.
There are some things that it just needs to go together.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where maybe in some of those preliminary conversations with artists, that's the kind of stuff that I might start getting a feel from. Sometimes you can listen to a rough mix and go, okay, what's the intent? They want this to kind of be this thing. Maybe it needs to be a wall rather than this like blanket that wraps around you or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the question, Carl.
No,
But
it does. It does. And it makes me, I just had like I'm like half sarcastic about this, but I kind of think there is something beautiful about if you have an attended session with a band and notoriously the guitarist will want the guitars louder and the drummer wants the drums louder. And you can just tell the guitarist, like, just move to your left like 2 feet and you'll be happy.
Just go sit over there.
Just go lean a little bit this way. Oh yeah. So it's like, it's like it's like the next stage of evolution from the whole like pretend to move a fader approach.
Yeah.
But no, so that's so okay. This is an Atmos noob question.
Yeah.
But so let's say you're working with an artist that's not local. How do they, this might be a really stupid question, but like, how do they preview and listen to the immersive version? I mean, assuming that they have AirPods, right? Like, is it just like something they can listen to and load up in Apple Music, or is it like a separate sort of like, preview, like web version? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great question. With the immersive stuff, with Dolby Atmos, there are a couple of different headphone formats. With Dolby, they actually have their own kind of binaural version, which is something that we have control of as engineers, and we can kind of assign different distances to things is the way it works in there to make things feel a little more kind of spatial and immersive in there. In addition to sort of the placement, because it does a binaural thing where, I was working on something real early on and I had headphones on because I can listen to it in here. And there was a voice that I had put in the back corner and it made me jump. And like I turned around and there was nobody there. So, and that was in headphones.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff can happen. So
I hear Georgia is pretty haunted. So are you sure it was in the mix?
Yeah, it was. So there's a Dolby version. Apple has their own kind of thing. They call it spatial audio, which is the way they deliver Dolby Atmos content. And we can talk about the differences if you really want to get into that in a minute. But what I will send to artists if they're remote, I mean, there's a couple of things that I'll do. The first thing is I'll check, is there a studio in the area that has speakers where I can connect with the engineer, might be able to get them into a room to go and listen. I mean, for someone who's in Nashville, for example, there are plenty of studios in Nashville that are Atmos, major markets. They've all got Atmos capable studios these days. But for other artists, or maybe someone's on tour and they're on a bus somewhere and they're just not going to be able to get into a studio and listen, we've got these headphone formats that work great. It's not quite the same experience, but it's the way most listeners these days listening to music, it is the way that they are hearing things these days, since the car audio is coming and it's starting to get rolled out more and more all the time. But until that really becomes the standard, headphones are how most people are listening to things. And honestly, I think that's the way most people are, well, not my generation, but, like my kids' generation, it's a headphone thing. So what I will usually typically do, long story long again, I will send the Dolby binaural version, and I'll say, hey, just listen to this in headphones. That's the way their song is going to be heard on Amazon. It's the way you're going to hear it on Tidal. If somebody is listening on Apple Music and they want to listen to spatial audio without AirPods, that's the way they're going to hear it too, I believe. It's kind of a little bit of a moving target because a lot of this is still a little bit of a moving target.
Yeah.
But I'll send them that, and then they can listen in headphones and comment and make notes. I can also send them a file that would be Apple specific if they want to hear the head tracking and really, do that kind of thing. I personally don't like doing that because to do that, I have to send an instruction booklet on how to do it, unfortunately. That's not as easy. It's just not as easy right now to listen to things that way. I think that's something that's going to change over the next, year or two.
And nothing
because
nothing makes an artist feel more excited about your mix of their song, of their creative baby, than having to read an instructional manual before listening to it.
Yeah, really, it's like you gotta text it to yourself, and then you gotta save it in the Files app, and then you go in and play. I know engineers, high level engineers they've got documents on this that they send out, and they've been fairly successful doing that. I personally don't like doing that because the artists that I've worked with in the past, like, I just know it's like, okay, they just need a file that they can play.
Yeah.
And with that binaural file, I mean, it's just a stereo waveform that has been created with, the binauralization in it. So I can put that in any kind of web-based player, like, if you're using Samply or Mixup, Dropbox, whatever you're using, I can just send that to a client and they can play it, and it's easy, which is what I like. I like making things as easy as possible for people because I don't want them to have to worry about the technical kind of stuff. That's, because then they're frustrated. Like, the last thing I want is somebody, when they finally go to their first listen of their song, like, they're frustrated because they had to go through this crazy technical procedure just to hear the thing. Now that's going to influence how they're, actually listening to it. I mean, hopefully it would be a relief and would, turn the day around. But I just like taking that out of the equation to begin with and make it as simple and easy for people so that they can just, hear their music.
Yeah. That's awesome. So my big question for you then is going to be, talking to the producers that are listening. I don't want to like get too technical about like the nerdy stuff. There's plenty of other places they can go, plenty of white papers they can read, I'm sure. But like, if you're a producer or let's say I'm a producer that doesn't currently do Atmos, and maybe I don't even do my own mixing, like, because I just don't. That's just not a thing that I really love, and maybe like trying to figure out the whole Atmos thing is just like more stuff to learn. That's not really what I'm excited about. I'm more excited about like the creation process and like working with the artist, right? So like, as a producer, what should I be looking for in a mix engineer that does Atmos, right? Like, cause I know like I know what to look for in like a mixing engineer, but when it comes to the Atmos side, there's a lot of people that are saying that they're doing Atmos, but they're not really quite as, I don't know, maybe they haven't been as far along in the emotional journey of translating songs to Atmos. So I'm curious, what would you say to a producer, like what should they be looking for?
I think there's a few things. I mean, number one, are they working on speakers? I think there's a lot of people out there who have gotten into Atmos and they're only working on headphones. And that is a great way to get started if you want to learn the technology. Headphones is a great way to start. but there are some things that will bite you if you are only working on headphones and not on speakers. So I would say make sure whoever you're working with, make sure they're working on speakers and are going to hear it in speakers. I know headphone the headphone side gets a lot of attention right now, but this is still a speaker format. And when car audio really starts blowing up, which I think it's really going to do, everybody I know who listens to Atmos in cars, they're amazed. When that really starts happening, I think there's a lot of engineers who are going to go and listen to some of the stuff they've done and, maybe want a mulligan on those mixes because they weren't listening in speakers and they were doing it all in headphones. So make sure it's someone who is working on speakers or has the ability to go and check it on speakers, because that's something you can do. You could work in headphones and then, go book a studio for half a day and listen on speakers and fix anything that doesn't work. The other thing, though, and maybe this is, to me, the bigger thing is, is the person who's doing the Atmos, like, are they into Atmos or did they just get into it so that they could work more? And not that it's a bad thing if you're getting into this because there are new opportunities there. I mean, hey, that's business. But I think you want somebody who actually really cares about it and loves the experience that you get from it being immersive, because there's stuff there's mixes I listen to from artists, that I grew up with, who I know, like, the creativity that was going on and things, and I will listen to these immersive mixes and it's just everything is up front and they're not taking advantage of that, and it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like the immersive versions feel like they run counter to those artists and what makes them them. So I think you want to work with engineers who actually love immersive and are trying to create that kind of experience. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, it was like, I saw it and I went, hey, this might be some opportunities to do this. But for me, I've been a surround sound junkie since high school. And I when I first heard Atmos, it was me I just said, okay, I've wanted to work this way my entire career. I'm getting older. I need to go for it. I need to do this. I mean, to me, the way I hear music in my head, that's Atmos. Just always the way that I, going back to my days as an artist and a songwriter, like, I hear it that way. And working in the format, it's almost like I'm not even thinking about a format now. I'm just thinking about music and how am I going to experience this music? And I can take these things in my head and now I can do it so that other people can hear it that way. So
that's, well, number one, that's going to make a really great clip for the Instagram. But also I feel like, maybe the way that I would say it, like, kind of listening to how you're describing this. And I think the short version of that, because you and I are talkers, and this is nice for me to be able to, like, let somebody else talk. Poor Ben, I just, like, talk over him all the time. But it's like the difference between somebody that gets into Atmos to provide a service versus someone that gets into Atmos to curate experiences. I think there's a very big difference there. And some people,
I think so.
And some people do just want, like, the service done. But I feel like if you want to if you're an engineer wanting to get into Atmos, do it because you want to create experiences. You're gonna have a lot more fun and get better results. And if you're a producer that's looking at bringing an Atmos mixer onto the team for projects, looking for somebody that is really dedicated into creating and crafting an experience for the listener, an experience for your clients' fans, right? Because that's the whole thing. It's like we're not just like, yes, we're doing it for ourselves because it's cool to shit, but also ultimately we're trying to make it an experience for the listeners of the artists who like the fans of the artists who have trusted us with their music. And that it can be tempting to just, do the swirly cowbell, which I know you have to do after this call, but like it's tempting to do that. But if we can, you know, have the restraint and the willpower to avoid helicopter cowbells and just create a unique experience for our our artist clients fans, then that's really the big delivery that we need to be responsible for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the service mentality that still stands. That is what we do as engineers. We're here, at least I'm here, to help my clients and to really take care of them and help them achieve their vision. First and foremost, that is always a big thing for me. But sometimes I think with the immersive side, sometimes it's being able to show them that, hey, what you had was amazing. We can make it even more than you even thought it would be.
Yeah.
But also you have to be able to like, the restraint side, you got to bring it down sometimes, because not every song should be that. I mean, you can't take like, and I don't think you need to either. I mean, that's what's interesting to me too is, on the one hand, we can start thinking about, it's like, oh, okay, well, I got a track I'm working on. It's like 500 tracks, and 499 of those are vocals somehow, and all the
And that other
ways
one, the other one is the cowbell.
right, the other one's the cowbell.
It's like a
do you
Steve. It
swirl
has to be
the
like a Steve
cowbell, or
Reich
do you
piece.
swirl the vocals?
Yeah, it has to be like a Steve Reich composition where it's like one cowbell and 499 vocalists. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve Reich or John Cage or somebody. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Those dense tracks, as we'll call them. Yeah, with Atmos, you can do some stuff with them and make things fit a little better. But there's also something that I think Atmos does with the smaller songs, and how you can achieve a different kind of intimacy with people.
Yeah.
You're just, you take your like singer-songwriter kind of stuff, and you want to, as an artist, you want to get in the room with your fans and really be able to have this song that they can connect from. There are things you can do with it. It's a different level of connection when you're experiencing that.
That's awesome. And yeah, first off, thank you for sharing that kind of an experience and creating that experience for artists. But secondly, thank you for being a restrained nerd with me today. I feel like we got right on the edge of like diving head first, but we stopped ourselves. We were good little boys, and we didn't get too nerdy and technical. And I appreciate you. I'm so glad you were here and able to kind of like give, I think, a bit of a different perspective on immersive audio that really should be talked about more, but I don't think gets enough attention.
Yeah, the creative side of it. I mean, I think a lot of us, that's where we want to get it to. I mean, it's this new thing, so yeah, we have to talk about the mechanics of how do we do it, but I can't wait until we have moved past that completely, and it's just experience, because that was what hooked me. That's what I know hooked a lot of other people, and I love that we were able to talk about that today and not have to get too much into all of that technical stuff. And thanks for bringing me on, Carl. I appreciate it, but I always enjoy talking to you. So it's just like us hanging out.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. I think you're awesome. And I am excited to come back in like 10 years when we're talking about mixing for neural implants and like,
Yes.
doing low pass smell filters and things. It's going to be real great time. But Dave, you're the man. I appreciate you. And I hope you have the best day ever. And I will, I'll see you next time.
Yep. Thanks, Carl. I'll talk
All
to you
right.
later.
Bye, Dave.